Hello, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, 5 Giving Trends for Nonprofits to Watch For in 2019. We're thrilled to have you here and to chat about what next year holds for the sector. So we're just going to wait another minute or so to get started so we can allow for everybody to get logged in. So just hold tight and we'll be back with you in just a minute. Again, welcome to 5 Giving Trends for Nonprofits to Watch For in 2019. With 2019 fast approaching, there are a lot of questions about what the future holds for nonprofits. So what should you expect to see next year? We're going to dive right into that in just a second. But first, there are just a few logistical notes that I wanted to make. We want this to be a really interactive webinar, so please be sure to ask all of your questions for our speakers by typing them into the questions box in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be addressing as many of the questions as possible in the Q&A portion at the end of the presentation, but please don't wait until then to submit your questions. Feel free to submit them as they come to you throughout the presentation. And to answer everybody's first question, yes, we are recording the presentation, and we'll be making the recording available along with the presentation deck to you via email in the next day or so. So don't worry if you don't catch everything. You'll still be able to review the content as much as you like. And now that the logistics are out of the way, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Arielle Gart, GuideStar's Marketing and Outreach Manager, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. And in my role at GuideStar, I implement many of our externally facing marketing initiatives, such as managing our social media channels, our webinars, and our online fundraising. And presenting on today's webinar, we are thrilled to have Dr. Ben Cipollini and Elizabeth McDonough from Classy. Ben is the Director of Data Insights at Classy, where he built and now oversees a team of data scientists on a mission to mobilize and empower the world for good. He joined Classy to help push forward the company's efforts on collecting and analyzing social impact data, and today his team works cross-functionally to publish reports and models about how fundraising works in the social sector. And Elizabeth is Classy's Demand Generation Marketing Manager, focused on customer-centric solutions for the modern nonprofit. She has launched countless of integrated campaigns for Classy over the last 5 years and shares a unique perspective on the most popular and successful marketing channels to date. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ben and Elizabeth to dive right in. So Elizabeth and Ben, feel free to take it away.
All right, thank you, Arielle, and I'm just waiting to get the slide permissions here. All right, here we go. Give us 1 second here. All right, here we go. So thank you, Arielle. As you just mentioned, my name is Elizabeth, and I'm on the marketing team here at Classy, and I'm really excited to dive into today's webinar content. But before we do so, we do want to offer one quick caveat. So today we're really talking about the trends we believe will impact giving in 2019 and beyond. So the things that we're talking about aren't necessarily trends in themselves. Rather, they're bigger things at work in the social sector and beyond that we believe will impact giving here in America next year. I also wanted to call out, we have our senior communications and PR manager, Monica Finch, in the room here with us today. Monica has, worked with us in tandem as we've developed the content for today's session, and she may chime in and answer a question too, or add some color to some of the things that we're talking about. So here's just a quick run through of the 5 key trends we're going to touch on before I pass things over to Ben. So first, we're going to start by discussing how America's altruism is going to be put to the test. We'll then discuss why recurring donors aren't just a number, they're your cause evangelists. We'll talk about how corporations are moving into philanthropy and taking a stand. I'll share why, the best marketers will raise the most money. And then we'll wrap things up by talking about, why you need to know your donors like Alexa does. All right, and with that being said, I'm going to pass things over to Dr. Ben, and he's going to kick things off by discussing why America's altruism is going to be put to the test.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. So, next slide. So a question that can you go back one for me? A question that we want to answer, but there's a challenging question to answer, is have people been giving back because of the new tax breaks? It's really challenging. We can't understand this just from our internal data, but we'd really love to know if it's happening, and if so, what's the profile of people who are affected by the tax breaks and giving differently. So just to jump into why, a little bit about the tax changes themselves and why we think they may impact giving. The standard deduction increased across the board, and that standard deduction is critical for itemizing taxes and getting those charitable giving tax deductions. So overall, when the standard deduction increases, people have less taxable income, they'll pay less taxes, they'll have more money available, but they'll also itemize their taxes less frequently. So those tax deductible gifts may be less important to them. So those are two conflicting, competing impacts, and we really want to know what's going to happen, and we hope you want to know too. So because we couldn't address this through our own data, we actually created a survey. We did a nationwide survey called Why America Gives to ask questions about this, whether people plan to give more, about the households they're giving from, things of that nature. Cool. So here's the gist of the survey results related to these tax changes. We found that nearly half of U.S. donors plan to donate more money to charity in 2018 than they did in 2017. With the upper end of the income households by income showing even more plans to give. So 74% of households with annual income of 100 to 150K, and 85% of households with 150K plus plan to give more in 2018. So all very bullish. And that was directly in line with, and then 10% of people also said, they plan to give less. So very few people plan to give less. Some people plan to give about the same, and a lot of people, especially with high incomes, plan to give more. And that was very much in line with our result there that said less than 10% of Americans say that tax write-off is their primary reason for donating to charity anyway. So everything seems very, very clear. Until we dug in just a little bit more. 42% of people also said that they definitely or probably would donate less if they knew that they were getting less of a tax incentive. So this is saying, even though less than 10% are driven primarily by taxes, it actually does matter. So we're starting to get these conflicting signals again. And it points to the fact that we can't look at what's happened so far to understand what the impact of the tax laws is. We're actually going to see this wash out in the coming year, in 2019, when people finally see what the impact is to their bottom line. They can assess what's going on and then make that decision of, do they have more money? Do they have less money? Did they get a tax break or not? Because though it's not the primary driver, it is a factor in what they're doing. Now, this opens up a number of strategic opportunities for nonprofits. So first, nonprofits themselves may have a bit of a tax break, the unrelated business income tax. So income unrelated to the nonprofit operation is taxed, and that tax rate went down. It's the corporate tax rate. And so nonprofits themselves can look at whether they'll have some more money just from savings and operations. Second is that those lower federal tax rates means donors may just have more money overall. And there are some indications, and there's been some discussion that large corporations may be passing on the tax savings to their employees. I think, did you want to give, I think Elizabeth had an example or two on that.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So just to share kind of a few examples here with, some ideas around how some large corporations are using their tax savings. A super recent example that I love is Patagonia. They just announced last week that they're donating the $10 million that they kind of saved in revenue due to the tax cuts this year to environmental groups. And that's really awesome to see. And it also, stands alongside their mission as a business. And then other large corporations, including Walmart, JetBlue, JP Morgan Chase, and Home Depot, they're passing along their tax savings onto their employees in the form of pay raises. Walmart specifically is raising its starting wage from $9 an hour to $11 an hour. So these are just kind of examples that feed into Dr. Ben's last point that he's going to make here.
Awesome. Thanks, Elizabeth. The last point here, my team has been looking pretty closely at matching programs and donations. And there's some nice articles in the literature that point out that matching programs can actually be more effective than tax incentives. So you can even think of the tax incentives as a small starter, but if you think of things like matching to join on and take advantage of those things, it's a comparison that's been done quite a few times, and I thought was interesting and relevant here. Now, one of the things that I'm starting to see some articles in the news to discuss, and that we've actually published a recent blog post on, is how tax changes relate to the rise of donor advised funds and what's going on there. And so I wanted to summarize a little bit what we found in our blog post, and talking with some economists over at UCSD to validate what we're seeing. As it turns out, total assets in donor advised funds are really increasing quite rapidly. So a donor advised fund is a place where a donor can put money and get a tax break without actually distributing to a charity. They can make the decision later. So they know that they want to give $20,000. They haven't determined to whom yet. They can put in a donor advised fund and then have that distributed when they choose. So now that the standard deduction has been increased, someone may want to give a larger chunk of money, but say, I'm not sure what I want to do with it yet, but I definitely want to make sure I'm over that deduction. And so we think that the tax changes will continue to impact DAF giving, and will contribute to continue rising contributions. What we do want to call out is two potential downsides of DAF giving. One is that while DAF giving has gone up, as in money being put in donor advised funds, DAF distributions, so them actually distributing to nonprofits for use of that money, has not been rising at the same rate. So I think nearly 2/3 of the volume that's going into DAFs doesn't come out. Only about 1/3 is coming out. A second piece, and something that we're really keen on and we're quite focused on, is building relationships between organizations and their supporters and donors. And having a donor advised fund between the donor and you breaks that connection. You may not even get the individual transactions or the donor data when giving goes through a DAF, and so you can't do that stewardship and cultivate the long-term relationship. So two really interesting issues that come through DAFs, and these tax laws definitely would push people to think about a giving mechanism like a DAF. So I'm going to hand back to Elizabeth, and she's going to give some actionable tips.
Great. Thank you, Ben. So after we touch on each of these key trends today, we're really going to share some actionable tips with you all. We want you all to feel empowered, quite literally, to take action in 2019. So here are just a few tips around, how you can motivate your donors to give back next year. The first thing is to really focus on the individual. We're going to talk about how important it is to understand your donors in a little bit, but your donors really want to feel valued and they want a personalized giving experience. So focus on the individual and how you can better relate or appeal to them. If you're able to do that, it'll likely result in an increase in donations. The second tip here is that your donors follow their hearts, not their pocketbooks. Something that our CEO here at Classy always stresses is that giving is a really personal choice. And if you continue to think about it that way, you can figure out how to best talk to and reach your donors. This third tip here is to invest in tools to diversify your fundraising portfolio, such as online fundraising software. This may seem like a little bit of a shameless plug for us here at Classy, but it's really not financially stable just to rely on one source of revenue. And donors of all generations are expressing that they want to give online. I want to call attention to the must-know tip we share on the bottom of this slide. In a recent survey that we did here at Classy, we found that 41% of the total respondents said that if they can't easily donate to a nonprofit online or via a mobile device, they will have less trust in how an organization uses those donated funds. So this is telling us that your donors expect you to have an online presence. And if you don't, your supporters can call into question, how you're using their dollars. So if you've relied on, direct mail appeals in the past, this is, great reinforcement that you should also have an online component and presence as well. This fourth tip here ties into what I just shared. You want to empower your donors to take action or fundraise on your behalf. Maybe you want to give them the option to make a monthly donation or to fundraise on their birthday. The list kind of really goes on here, and it's online fundraising tools that really do empower your supporters to give back when they want to and in the way that they want to. And then finally, you need to build relationships or trust with your donors. You want to make sure that your fundraising software is giving you access to that supporter's information because you want control over that donor data, because this is what allows you to thank them for their gift and cultivate relationships with them over time. So that is, also really critical, ensuring that you have access to your donor data and that you're using that to build relationships. So just some tips for you guys to take into consideration for next year. And I'm going to pass things back off to Ben here. But before we're going to do that, I'm sure some of you guys can see we've got a little bit of a wonky view going on in GoToWebinar right now. So we're going to get the slides fixed back up so they're more presentable for you guys, less distraction. We apologize for that. We think that something happened in kind of the transfer of presenter permissions. So give us just 1 second here.
Elizabeth, I've just switched it to PowerPoint, so you should be good to go now.
Great. Okay. Let me make sure I have the ability to advance our slides. We jumped too far ahead. Okay, 1 second, guys. Thanks for bearing with us. It wouldn't be a webinar without a technical issue. Okay, so I'm going to pass things off to Ben here, and he's going to touch on why your recurring donors aren't just a number, they're your cause evangelists.
Awesome, thanks. This is one of my favorite topics ever. Okay. I think, can we go back one slide, I think? No? Okay, cool. So we tend to think of recurring donors as, in some sense, a set it and forget it. We published in our yearly fundraising report, State of Modern Philanthropy, how valuable recurring donors are. They're 42% more valuable than fundraisers and over 5 times more valuable than one-time donors. But we think of that in terms of their monthly giving, automated giving, leave them alone and let them pay. Actually, as it turns out, addressing recurring donors with appeals makes more sense than addressing one-time donors and appeals. So in that second bullet point, we found within a year, a donor who's making a recurring gift will give an additional one-time gift about 75% more often than a one-time donor will come back and give a second gift, right? So all that donor stewardship or retention that we're thinking about, recurring donors are much more ready to give again as a one-time gift than one-time donors are. So totally the opposite of how we tend to be thinking. In the same way, you know, on a day like Giving Tuesday, an event-driven day, we saw that recurring donors were choosing to participate in that. And not only participate, but year over year, we saw 84% increase in the participation rate of those recurring donors during an event like Giving Tuesday. So these are highly activated donors, people who really care. We're starting to look at our data and what recurring donors will do in terms of fundraising, and we also see that they will fundraise as well. Now, this kind of contrasts and flies in the face of the idea that we want to set it and forget it, that if you contact those recurring donors, you may be reminding them that they're giving and they may choose to cancel. This is not borne out in their activity levels. It's not borne out in the data that we've seen. So let me pull up some of that data so I can share it with you. Yes. So next after recently published with Salesforce, a recurring giving benchmark. In there, they had some interesting things. So they talked about how recurring donors were being addressed in very similar email strategies as one-time donors. In fact, they were receiving fewer appeals than one-time donors. And contrast that with the idea that of the data I just showed you, that they're giving one-time donations more often, right? So the data for outreach don't match the data and what they're actually doing. There's an opportunity to do more with them. And in fact, just generally, I would point out that unsubscribe rates to nonprofit emails is much lower than across the for-profit industry. So I think we're very conservative in our outreach, that there's opportunities to ask for more, and recurring donors are a great place to think about that, and a non-traditional one at that. Cool. Back to Elizabeth for these actionable tips.
All right, thanks, Ben. So to round things out with some actionable tips, first we want to share how you can cultivate relationships with your monthly donors. Our first tip here is to send more than transactional emails. Dr. Ben just mentioned Next After and Salesforce recent study and how majority of nonprofits aren't treating recurring donors any different than one-time donors. And this is something you definitely do not want to do, and you need to communicate with your recurring donors more frequently than you're doing so with one-time donors. And, you know, the caveat, simply sending monthly transactional emails, that's just not enough. Our second tip here is to build a sense of community and communicate the impact of a recurring gift. As I just shared, giving is really personal, and if someone is making the decision to support your mission on a monthly basis, it's really likely that they want to feel like they're part of a dedicated community and they want to learn about the impact of their respective gift. And then our final tip here is that personal relationships are important too. Nonprofits often prioritize their one-on-one relationships with major donors. However, what's really keeping you from cultivating relationships with the people that are supporting your cause on a monthly basis? A personal relationship will only deepen their dedication to your organization and actually potentially move them to get further involved. We know it's not scalable to have a one-on-one relationship with all of your recurring donors, but there is an opportunity to, cultivate those relationships with a subset of your recurring donor base. And we have here just a few additional actionable tips around how you can ask your recurring donors to do more. The first is to ask your recurring donors to advocate on your behalf. If they're donating to your organization on a monthly basis, I take a wild guess that they're more than willing to advocate for your cause and kind of build brand awareness for you. The second tip here is that if you're ever looking for volunteers, I'd start with your recurring donor base. As we said, these guys are your cause evangelists, and the data is telling us that they're, ready to take action. And, the best for last here, invite your recurring donors to fundraise on your behalf. Just a moment ago, Ben shared some data with us that reinforces this. And this is a great way to get them further involved. And it's also a win-win for your team. So if your recurring donors are fundraising on your behalf, you're actually unlocking access to new third-party donors that you can then nurture over time. So just a few tips for you guys to take into consideration here. Okay, now we're going to move on to trend number 3. Corporations move into philanthropy and take a stand. So to set the stage here, we want to share a few data points that really reinforce this statement. Brands are taking a stand. This first one here, according to the 2018 Edelman Trust Barometer, which is an annual survey published by the PR and marketing communications firm Edelman, 64% of the survey respondents say that CEOs should take the lead on change rather than waiting for government policy. This is really revealing. Employees are looking first to their employers to take action and to have an opinion on, somewhat controversial issues. We can also see the financial impact of corporate giving. According to the Giving USA 2018 annual report, corporate giving totaled a little over $20 billion in 2017. And in a recent survey conducted by Classy, Why America Gives, 48% of our respondents said that they're more likely to personally support a nonprofit or cause that their employer supports, revealing the enormous influence that employers can have on their employees' charitable giving efforts. So we're calling this out today because this is really the new normal. Companies are now expected to take stances on issues that may have previously been seen as polarizing or taboo. And a recent example that I think is still top of mind for a lot of us is Nike's advertising campaign celebrating the 30th anniversary of Just Do It. The ads feature former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick, who received a lot of heat for kneeling during the national anthem in protest during football games. And, it's very clear here with their advertising campaign that Nike is making a social statement. The ad's tagline, if you can kind of see it here on this billboard ad, is, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything, which, is alluding to, a larger issue and, controversial conversation that was taking place in society. All right, so if brands are aligning with issues, how does that mobilize people towards nonprofits? So as the data revealed, there is an enormous amount of influence that employers can have on their employees' charitable giving efforts. Employees are really looking to their employer to have an opinion on these controversial issues. And a recent example, that comes to mind that reinforces this is Tom's Shoes campaign that they just launched to advocate for gun control. I'm sure, a number of you guys have seen that quite recently. The second point here is that millennials want to work at cause-driven companies. Millennials are really eager to work at businesses that are connected with more than just, their bottom line, and they want to feel like they're giving back in some way, even if it's small, to an organization or a cause. This is kind of more of the new normal. And then finally, there really is an opportunity for nonprofits to take their corporate sponsorships to the next level through strategic engagement strategies. An example of this is, a strategic corporate sponsorship. Valpar is a paint and coating manufacturer, and Lowe's Home Improvement, they're just a couple of Habitat for Humanity's nonprofits legacy partners. And as you guys, most of you know, their Habitat for Humanity is dedicated to building and repairing houses for low-income families. And this is just 2 examples of really strategic partnerships that they make a lot of sense for Valpar and Lowe's, and it also gives their employees an opportunity to give back. Okay, so to round out this section with some actionable tips. We have a great blog post that we're actually going to share with you guys in the follow-up for the webinar. I encourage you all to check it out. 4 smart ways nonprofits can tap into corporate giving. And we've listed here, the 4 key steps that you can take to really capitalize on corporate giving. So the first here is to choose your partner wisely. When seeking corporate giving opportunities, it's extremely important to choose a compatible partner. So make no mistake, if you fail to choose wisely, you can definitely stir controversy and potentially damage your organization's brand reputation. So if you guys are taking note from the previous, it was a 3-year partnership between UNICEF Canada and Cadbury. Cadbury is a candy company, for those of you that don't know. The public, was really quick to note the inconsistencies between the organization's cause to advocate for children's health health and development, and the role of candy as an unhealthy food for children. So, you want to choose wisely. The second tip here is, to prepare a value proposition. As you're working to cultivate corporate partnerships, you'll need to really demonstrate the value of a partnership to the companies you approach. And, beyond creating social impact, what is incentivizing these corporations to give back to your organization? What impact will they be making in the community? And will their contributions gain positive publicity? The third tip here, explore non-monetary options. So nonprofits are quick to seek large grants or contributions, but monetary gifts, are not the only form of corporate giving. And, in fact, we're seeing many corporations opting to give in-kind support, like donated goods, services, their staff expertise, technology, other contributions that aren't just cash. And, an example for you guys, MAC Cosmetics has been a longtime sponsor of Broadway Bears, which is the annual burlesque fundraising event benefiting Broadway Cares. Equity Fights AIDS. They're a client of ours here at Classy. And not only does the company share a passion for their cause, but the annual fundraiser provides an opportunity for MAC artists to offer their time and talents behind backstage, which is really fun. And since 1997, the cosmetics manufacturer has donated makeup and skilled staffers to create amazing looks for their performers every single year. And this last tip here that we have for you guys is to build the campaign and assets ahead of time. A large piece of American corporate giving efforts, come from employee giving campaigns. So while companies want to empower their employees to give back, they're often time-crunched employers, and they struggle with administering a corporate giving campaign effectively. And this actually presents a really unique opportunity for nonprofits. So with the right nonprofit fundraising software, you can really easily hand over a completed campaign page to your corporate partner to get the campaign rolling immediately. Again, kind of to plug Classy here, you can quickly hand over the control of a campaign page by adding your partner as a campaign administrator. So those are just some actionable tips for you guys to round out the section. So kind of moving ahead, as a marketer, this is selfishly what I'm the most excited to talk about today. The better you get at marketing, the more money you'll raise. And I'm going to walk you guys through, a few key trends that we're kind of seeing within the marketing landscape of the world. So the first one is, marketers are more sophisticated today, arguably more sophisticated than they've ever been before. And that's thanks to technology, new tools, artificial intelligence. Marketers really have more ability to personalize and really automate their marketing outreach and tactics. It's changing how they're operating as teams. And on the digital front, we have self-service advertising platforms such as Facebook and Google that are allowing you to reach your target audiences with an increased amount of accuracy. And this really presents an opportunity for nonprofit marketers who are looking to recruit some new supporters. You can target new supporters that have similar attributes to those who are already, supporting your cause, increasing your likelihood of recruiting new donors. All right, this next kind of key trend here is something that I have a pretty strong opinion on. Your donor expectations are set by consumer interactions. So if you think about your interactions with big brand names such as Amazon and Apple, you probably have pretty high standards. Even if they do something very small wrong, you're going to call it out. You expect them to have an outstanding web experience, and it's kind of understood. Amazon knows what you want to buy before you even buy it, and you recognize these brands' advertising and messaging, even if their name isn't listed. And, while we're all not Amazons and Apples of the world, it's these companies that are really setting the standards. And, your consumers really do have high expectations of you, even within the social sector. Consumers are expecting a lot. And this kind of leads into my next point here, which is that a one-size-fits-all donation appeal, it officially falls flat. Again, if you're thinking about your interactions with big brand names like Amazon or maybe even in Nordstrom, they're top of mind for me right now because it's the giving season and, holiday shopping. All of their emails, all of their remarketing, advertising campaigns, everything that they're, sending me from a marketing perspective are some way related to my past buying behavior. And their marketing tactics are really unique to the individual. And we can draw parallels to the consumer world in the social sector. So if you're thinking about your donor base, they fall into different giving buckets. And this is a really easy and effective way to segment your donors by their giving history. And what this does is it allows you to craft unique marketing messages and campaigns that are unique to their respective giving history. And then, as we just talked about technology, you can kind of rely on technology to automate, a lot of these marketing activities for you. And, we also did want to call this out, when you're thinking about your donors and asking them to give online, don't leave out your major donors. More large one-time gifts are being made online. And in fact, here at Classy, we saw a gift, a little over $100,000 donation come in on Giving Tuesday. So don't forget about your major donors. They're ready to give to you online as well. All right, and another thing to keep an eye on in 2019 is the rising postal rates. If you haven't heard, the USPS has proposed to increase the cost of first-class stamps by 10% next year, and the price of marketing mail and bulk rates is predicted to go up by 2.4%. So these increasing costs mean that your offline marketing tactics, such as direct mail appeals, are likely going to get more expensive. And then finally, influencers are going to continue to play a bigger role in 2019. Organizations reported growth in social media followers in 2017. Instagram audiences growing by 44%, Twitter lists growing by 15%, and Facebook fans growing by 13%. And while you might assume that the best way to reach social media audiences is through the endorsement of a major celebrity, our survey data from our recent survey, Why America Gives, shows that organizations are actually better off focusing on more relatable champions of their causes, like social media influencers. And you can see here that 26% of survey respondents indicated that social media influencers are the most influential at rallying support. Okay, so I just talked about a lot of things in the marketing world. I told you this is my favorite thing to talk about. So some advice for you guys before I pass things back over to Ben here. The first is to eliminate any barriers between your marketing and development teams. It's your marketing team's job not only to drive brand awareness, but also donations. So the more the two teams can work together, the more successful your fundraising campaigns will be. This next point here is to really understand your donors' communication preferences, and this will help you understand what marketing channels will drive the highest donor response rate. And, as we talked about, your donor expects you to know about these type of things, so that's something that you really need to know. So next, while technology and artificial intelligence are on the rise, you do want to leverage software to automate the processes that are scalable. It can save you a ton of time and resources, but don't let technology replace your personal relationships. And technology is only going to continue to improve, so don't forget about the value of those in-person conversations and what that can mean to your organization. This last point, second to last point here, plan to offset the increasing postal rates by integrating your offline and online appeals. A number of clients of ours here at Classy are already doing this, and just by adding an online campaign component to a traditional offline campaign can help you not only reach, but kind of exceed your fundraising goals and hopefully help you offset some of those increasing costs. And then finally, cultivate a network of social influencers or champions for your cause. Think about, what people kind of make sense for you and your organization. But I did want to also plug that these influencers could also be your recurring donors. All right. And with that being said, I'm going to pass things back over to Ben, who's going to take us through our last trend here.
Great. So I wanted to kick off this trend by doing a poll in GoToWebinar. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how well do you know your donor base? I like to say 1 not being not at all, 5 being they may as well be a family member or very well. So are we going to wait for the survey results? We are. Can I use this time to talk more?
We're letting everybody come in, and I'll close the poll in just another second. So just another second to get your answers in.
Awesome. I'm very tempted to talk more about recurring donors in the meantime. I love recurring donors. Okay, so we're getting a nice kind of almost normal-ish distribution there. I appreciate you guys coming through. Those are some very valid data. So a lot of people responding, I know them okay. So if we go to the next slide, I like to, the more you know your donors, the better a marketer you'll be. And I like to say, I'm in data science, so I'm all about getting the data together, running algorithms to understand the data. But I also like to say that we've all got an amazing AI inside of our heads. It's called our brain. We need to make sure that we are looking at our own data, understanding our own data, and processing it ourselves. So we really need to really encourage people to know the donors. Let's go on to the next slide. I'll give you some examples of questions you can ask yourself to benchmark how well do you know your donors and why you might care. So, for example, where do your donors get their news? We know that more than 50% of people get at least some of the news from social media, right? And so understanding, and we also know that a lot of giving is driven by the news cycle. This comes out in the survey that we did, Why America Gives. We've also seen it in our own data in spikes around donations and various reports. Second thing that's really important to know, what's their favorite social media channel? So we see in yearly reports in the industry that Instagram's growing. We know that 95% of nonprofits have a Facebook page. We know that Twitter's out there and is really active in the political and news cycle. Which one to use, right? How to address your donors? Well, you need to know your donors to know where to target your time, because we're all really busy, not too much time. The third one is going back to email. Are they engaging with your email newsletters? If so, how often? I think doing benchmarks against M&R, I actually quoted some data earlier from MailChimp, really thinking about these things in terms of what's been published out there, right? Knowing these things about your donors and how they behave can help instruct you on who are your donors, what's your donor makeup. Next, do they engage with you more on the weekdays or weekends? Another great thing to know, because that can indicate to you what type of device they're accessing from or what type of giving they might do. We know that from our data that people tend to use desktops at work during weekdays to do a major part of giving, and they tend to be more likely to give larger donations, whereas we see weekends and weeknights a large uptick in mobile-based giving, which tend to be smaller, but tend to be more social and on those social media platforms. So assessing a data point like that, understanding your data can help give you that level of insight in there. And then the random question, do they have kids? Why would we care if they have kids? This is just the general idea that kind of we get in the for-profit sector, and that is a little bit slow to be taken up in the nonprofit sector. And I think Elizabeth talked a bit about already, this personalization, just know people, know what they care about, right? Yes, they care about your cause. And getting to that final bullet point, what other causes do they care about? What other things are they doing that they care about? Those things can inform you on how to make appeals to them that make sense, that grab their attention, that grab their heartstrings in ways that aren't only direct from your cause itself. And so just to bring that back, I mentioned the consumer world, the for-profit world. Brands have invaded our personal lives. They've done a great job. They can predict what we can do before we even do it. In the social sector, in the nonprofit world, we need to get there. What they're doing is amazing, and we can do the same things, but we can do it for good, for a better cause, not just consumerism and buying things, but for making things happen. So, it makes my job as a data scientist easy. There's a lot of tried and true methods in the for-profit world that we just leverage and go ahead and publish results in the nonprofit sector. Really encourage you all to do the same. Cool. Handing back to Elizabeth for the final actionable tips.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, so just to wrap things up today with some actionable tips. The first one here, survey your donor database. You can get answers to some of the questions that Ben just asked and use this information to inform how and when you're communicating with your donors. It may seem intrusive or, a really big ask. I receive kind of like marketing surveys myself on a pretty consistent basis, and some of them from, different technologies that we actually use internally here at Classy. And if you position it in kind of a lighthearted and fun way, you'd be surprised with the responses that you could get from doing something like that. So survey your donor database. Tools like SurveyMonkey and Typeform are out there that will allow you to do so. The second one, set up one-on-one calls with your recurring donors and ask for some anecdotal feedback. We talk a lot about the importance of quantitative data, but qualitative data is really important too, and it can actually help, potentially inspire a new fundraising campaign or, kind of give you inspiration to do something differently. I know for me personally here at Classy, the more I talk to our customers one-on-one, it reinforces some of the data that Ben and his team publishes, but it also kind of, gives me some new inspiration or like gets me thinking about things in new ways that I haven't in the past. And we use that as inspiration for a lot of the content that we develop here. This third tip here is conduct a website deep dive. So leverage tools like Google Analytics to really understand, what's driving traffic back to your website, and maybe even what's driving those online donations. And it's kind of like, who knows what you'll uncover. You could find that a blogger or maybe a social media influencer is actually driving a lot of traffic back to your site, and maybe you never knew so before. That presents an opportunity for you to kind of double down on that channel as a traffic driver and kind of do some great things with a new partner in the future. And Google Analytics can also be used to get a lot of demographic data on those that are visiting your website, so you can learn a lot about the people that are searching for you and kind of interacting and engaging with you guys online. And then finally, and I think this is really important, analyze the impact of your fundraising campaigns and marketing tactics. I'm personally really guilty of this. We can launch a marketing campaign and then it's easy to say, it's live, we achieved what we wanted to do, we move on to the next thing. But taking time to do those retros and understanding, what's working, what's not working, it allows you to figure out, where you should be spending your time. So you can see, if you're emailing a certain subset of your donors and they're not taking any action, maybe that's indicative that email is not the channel that you should be communicating with them on, or maybe you need to switch up the content and take a different approach. Those are the types of insights that you're not going to get if you're not taking the time to really analyze the impact of the things that you're already doing. And with that being said, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Arielle. We're actually going to open it up to some questions from you guys right now for the last kind of 10 minutes here.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for your insight today. I know I learned a lot, so I'm sure that everybody else on our webinar learned a lot too. We do have quite a few questions that have come in, so I'll go ahead and get started. A couple of them actually just talking about the last topic that you guys were just talking about in terms of, learning more about your donors, specifically as, where it relates to surveys. And one of them was, do you have any tips on how to actually get donors to respond to the survey? Is there, a specific recommended number of questions, or is there some sort of raffle prize? What kind of things will entice the donors to actually respond?
Great question. So something that a lot of people in the for-profit world do is they'll often offer like a $5 Starbucks gift card. Maybe I've seen people do something more significant from the financial side of things, even offering like a $200 Amazon gift card. Obviously, in the social sector, you're not always going to have access to that type of capital. But I think you maybe could, get creative. Like if you have some free swag in your office, maybe like a t-shirt or, a mug or something like that, you could, send that out as an incentive. The first, 20 people that complete the survey will receive X, Y, and Z. Or maybe there's something that you could do more interactive. If you're a nonprofit with a big like local community donor base, you could kind of do like a celebration night or something for those folks that complete that survey for you, so you can get a little bit creative. And I think Ben maybe wants to chime in here.
Thanks. Yeah, those are all good things. We also know on the donation side, people are very responsive to giving them a sense of why you're doing it, right? We're all contributing to the social sector because we care. So if you can be very clear up front, whether it's doing donations or sending out a survey about what the impact of doing this is, I think people will also be very responsive. I would also just mention that in the literature, in terms of gifts can help augment response rates, but it's definitely a law of diminishing returns there. So bigger gifts aren't going to get, 10x gift isn't going to get you 10x the results. So I think mixing impact with some small incentives can really optimize for getting people in there.
No, that's great. And do you have any recommendations for any kind of survey templates for a nonprofit who's never really kind of surveyed their donors before? Any place to send them to kind of get started?
I would personally check out SurveyMonkey and then Typeform. Typeform has like a little bit of a better user interface. The surveys that you can create are a little bit prettier, and I know they've got a lot of really awesome like resources and content that you can check out.
We did get also a couple of questions specifically about social media influencers. Can you tell us what or whom you'd consider a social media influencer?
Yeah, so I think one of the easier ways to answer that question is if like you think of like people that are well-known bloggers within your network. I'm a foodie, so I follow several, food bloggers. It's very clear that they work with a lot of brands like Williams-Sonoma or Crate and Barrel or La Crusette, and they promote kind of their products and, what they're using as their cooking delicious food, and they subtly kind of like weave that into their posting and their like live stories, and that's the type of influencer that can subconsciously actually motivate you to buy something without even thinking about it. I think of like Give Me Some Oven. She's a blogger. It's like, oh well, she was using that, so I guess I need that in my kitchen. But there are other bloggers that are environmentalists, people that are very passionate about animal conservation. It kind of really runs the gamut. So, kind of take a look at, different sectors, and, use that as a starting point to try to identify, what may be a good influencer for your organization. And then Ben's going to chime in.
Yep. Just from a data scientist perspective, I would define influencer as someone with a large social following and whose followers also have large social following, so that there's a network effect that goes on. So we have computational ways to do that, but just think large social following is a good heuristic.
No, that's great. I know, to get started with something like that, it's always good to start in figuring out, like, okay, what's the first step? All right, that's identify people who kind of are in the same kind of industry as you have commonalities and things like that, and kind of go from there. Another question that we got, specifically about kind of soliciting your donors is, how do you know when you're asking for donations from people too often? Obviously, besides them not responding to it, is there a good measure of kind of how much is too much, or what's really the right amount of communication?
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. This isn't my area of expertise, so I'm going to tell you the few things that I do know, and I think there's much more to learn. Yeah, if you're making appeals and people aren't responding, I think you're good. People tend not to respond. Open rates are pretty low. Donation click-through rates are even lower. Donation rates even lower. So do not fear. What I referenced before was about unsubscribe rates. If your unsubscribe rate starts pushing up high on an email, then you may have a problem. I think general unsubscribe rates are under 1%, like 0.25%. I mentioned that in the nonprofit sector, it's even lower. It's like 0.15%. So if you're seeing, 1 out of 100 people are unsubscribing, you may be emailing too much. But most likely people just will not do that. They will ignore you. The other potential indicator is there are common rates of open rates and click-through rates and donation rates from emails. If you're seeing that trend down over time, then you may be experiencing fatigue. And again, just use a different appeal type or different types of content to get there, is my recommendation.
Perfect. And there were a couple of other questions also about DAFs, specifically like, how long is a DAF able to keep funds before they're distributed to a nonprofit? Can you touch a little bit more on just how DAFs work?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, there is no, as far as I understand, there is no timeline for this, and that's why it's a little bit scary. Is the money can stay in the DAF indefinitely, and one issue with that is when the money stays. So DAFs are managed by large groups like, say, Fidelity. It's actually in the manager's interest to keep the money in the DAF because they get paid based on how much is in the DAF, not how much is distributed. And with no timeline, we just don't think that the incentives are set up to have a quick pass-through to get the money to organizations. And so we've got this backlog of money there and no indication that that's going to decrease, but only potentially increase. Glad to answer more DAF questions if there's specific ones as well.
Great. We have a few comments and questions from nonprofits that are relatively kind of new in terms of how long they've been around for, and just kind of looking for, in 2019, what's the number one thing that they should focus on if they've got very limited resources and bandwidth? What's the most important thing for them to do out of all the things that you guys have spoken about today? What's like the number one to focus on? And your opinion may vary.
Yeah, this is it's a loaded question, but I'll take kind of a stab at, what I would recommend. So for a smaller nonprofit, there are, free or very low price point tools out there. A lot of software, has kind of pay as you go plans or free tools that nonprofits can have access to. The functionality is limited, but if you're just getting started, it's a good place to get started is kind of you're building up your donor network. And then kind of expand and go from there. If I were starting a nonprofit tomorrow, there are 2 things or kind of 3 things that I'd be focused on. The first one is, growing my kind of like email subscription list or like my donor database, who are the people that I'm contacting. So I'd want to be sure that I had kind of a lightweight CRM. And then I also, would want to, be sure that I had the ability to email those folks and reach them through that channel. So I would, definitely prioritize having an email marketing platform. And then kind of, as you're expanding, also, you want to, be sure that you're giving your donors the option to donate back online. There are free tools that, you can use, such as Classy. We kind of have a pay-as-you-go model that you can use to kind of power your online giving. And, Classy's pay-as-you-go free tools also gives you access to your donor data, which I just touched on. That's really important. I know that, nonprofits can fundraise through Facebook for free, but you don't have access to that donor data. So you can't steward those relationships over time. And for an organization that's just starting out, that's really, really important. You want to start, growing your donor database so you have a network of people that you're communicating with over time. And hopefully those people actually help build your organization. And Ben has something to add.
Sorry, Elizabeth says so many interesting things. It inspires me. I want to butt in and add a little bit. Yeah, I'm totally on board with everything she just said. I think building those muscles from the start about donor stewardship, like, get in the habit from the start. You're not going to have more time. Whether you do email automation and small donor type stuff, or whether you do phone calls and high touch things, I think is really dependent on what types of donations you're seeing, whether you're getting a lot of small donations or some really large ones. So make that call on the fly, but definitely exercise those muscles. in terms of stewardship, and the call out to those data, those, to go from a small nonprofit to a big one is by doing that donor stewardship, starting somewhere where you're getting the money but not the donor data and the donor stewardship. You're going to cut yourself off at the knees. You're never going to scale.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for your insight and help answering all of those questions. We are just about at time, so just wanted to take a second to thank both Ben and Elizabeth for all of their expertise today, to thank every single one of you for joining us for our webinar about what to watch for in 2019. And we hope that you have a great rest of 2018 and a very successful 2019. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.